Thank you. So this is building a Tellurion. You can see the Tellurion on the front, and I invite you to come down and have a closer look at it when we're done. So firstly, what is a Tellurion? Perhaps you're familiar with the concept of an orrery, a mechanical device, perhaps clockwork, perhaps motorized, which shows you how the planets move around the sun. They're not all physically to scale, but they move in a way in which the actual timing of how long it takes Mercury, Earth, Moon, etc. to rotate are correct. So that's an orrery, named after the Earl of Orrery. But a Tellurion is, if you like, a more detailed version of what the Earth and the Moon are doing relative to the Sun. So it's still, Moon goes around the Earth, Earth goes around the Sun, but it's obviously on a somewhat different scale, which means it's possible to build into the function of a Tellurion things like working out when eclipses take place, which is essentially impossible on a smaller scale, such as the orrery on the left. Where do we get the word from? Well, the Tellurion comes from Tellus, Tellus meaning the Earth in Latin. In Greek, it's Gaia. In Latin, it's Tellus, and so from Tellus we get Tellurion. So why should we build one? Why do we bother with these particular devices? Well, they are useful instructional ways of getting across the concepts of day and night, because the Earth is rotating. We can also explain the changing seasons, because the Earth's axis will always point in a given direction. So on one side it'll be tilted towards the sun, on the other side it'll be tilted away from the sun, so we can explain seasons. We can explain the lunar phases by thinking of where the Moon is as it goes around the Earth relative to the Sun. And if we're clever about it, because of the mechanisms in here, we can predict lunar eclipses and predict solar eclipses. So that's why Tellurions were built in the first place. Let's just remind ourselves of how eclipses work before we go any further. We, of course, don't get an eclipse of the Sun every new moon, and we don't get an eclipse of the Moon every full moon. That's because the Moon's orbit is tilted by about 5 degrees or so. So you can see on the right-hand side here, when we have a new moon, if the Moon's orbit is tilted such that the new moon is actually quite high, elevated above the plane of the Earth's orbit, then the new moon effectively skirts over the top of the Sun. It goes north of the Sun. And on the left-hand side, we can see the tilt is such that the new moon is below the plane of the Earth's orbit, the ecliptic, and hence, again, we don't get an eclipse. If we want a new moon to actually give us an eclipse, then we have to have this so-called line of nodes. This node is where the Moon's orbit intersects the Earth's orbit. So remember, the Moon's orbit is tilted. This is the ecliptic, the Earth's orbit, and where the two intersect is called the two nodes. So if we have a new moon where there's a node, then we will have a direct line from the Earth to the Moon to the Sun, and hence we get an eclipse. So a requirement for eclipse of the Sun is not only that the Moon must be at the new part of its phase, it must also coincide with the point where the new moon is actually at a node where the orbit of the Moon intersects the orbit of the Earth. So we need to keep track of where these nodes are to work out whether or not we're going to get an eclipse. And the same is true if we think about the full moon and the moon going into the Earth's shadow. We have to have a full moon at a node. So if we want to be able to tell when an eclipse is taking place, we've got to track where the phase of the moon is, new moon, full moon, etc., and other things as well. So there are 3 types of month built into the Tellurion. It's not so important to know where the moon is in terms of a sidereal month, because we're not thinking about where things are relative to the stars. In a sense, that's irrelevant. We're only interested in the relative positions of the Earth and the Moon and the Sun. So sidereal month doesn't actually matter. So we're interested in the synodic or synodic month. How long does it take the moon to go from new moon to new moon? That has to be built into this mechanism. And that's that particular ring there, which is actually holding the moon and moving the moon around the Earth. But remember, if we want to understand eclipses, we have to work out where this line of nodes are. Where are the nodes where the moon's orbit intersects the Earth's orbit? The length of time it takes to go from one node all the way round and back to the same node again, that's called a draconic month, and we have to keep track of where those are. And there's a particular ring underneath that one which deals with the draconic month, and that ring is turning at a different rate to this one to make sure that we can work out where the new moon is and where the nodes are. And there's one final thing we need to take into account, and that is that the moon's orbit around the Earth is an ellipse, not a circle, which means sometimes the moon is closer and sometimes the moon is further away. And if we have the moon at its greatest distance from the Earth, the disk of the moon will not be large enough to cover the disk of the sun, and then we would get an annular eclipse if an eclipse occurred. If the moon is a lot closer, the disk appears bigger, and then it's large enough to cover the disk of the sun, and then we get a total eclipse. And the length of time it takes to go from the closest point back to the closest point again in the elliptical orbit of the moon is called the anomalistic month, how long it takes to go from perigee to perigee. Now, it's difficult to actually build that into gears, because gears like to be circular so that they stay meshed. If you have elliptical gears, they keep coming out of contact with each other. So it's very difficult to get a true elliptical motion using gears. So in this particular Tellurion, the distance from perigee to perigee is monitored by a separate dial which tells you what's going on down here. This tells you if you get an eclipse, a little indicator will tell you, is that eclipse going to be a total eclipse or is that eclipse going to be an annular eclipse, by telling you whether you're close to perigee, the closest point, or whether you're close to apogee, the furthest point. If you're close to apogee, it'll be an annular eclipse. If you're close to perigee, the moon is bigger and you'll get a total eclipse. But the length of time it takes to do each of these months are all different. Synodic month is 29.5 days, a draconic month is 27.2, and anomalistic is similar but not the same value. So the various teeth on all of these gears, or the chains, etc., have to be calculated such that these 3 months come out as close as possible to those 3 values. And then we stand a chance of being able to correctly account for the motion of the moon around the Earth. Okay, that's what it does. How do you build one? Well, there are a number of ways of doing it. Originally, when this was first available, you would sign up to receive a magazine every week for a year. In other words, builds in weekly parts to a complete Tellurion. You've heard that phrase before for lots of different models. Well, that's how this was originally released. It's sometimes called an Earth, Moon, Sun orbiter, which is a rather long way of saying it's a Tellurion. Basically, one option is to sign up for this magazine, and on the first week you get a magazine and the Earth, and in the second week you get another magazine and a few cogs and a few washers and a few springs, and the third week you get another and a few more and a few more and a few more, and literally you build up 52 sets of all the bits you need to build the Tellurion, and you keep going until you get to part number 52, which is a little grub screw and a collar as well. So that's one way of doing it. You sign up, you subscribe to the magazine. That's how it was done some years ago. I'll say later about how you might do it now. The magazines themselves, I've got a few examples here if you want to take a closer look. The individual magazines sometimes have some interesting information about the Earth or the Moon or the Sun, but most importantly, the magazines have the instructions to what you need to do with the parts that you've just received this week or last week. And I must say, the instructions are very clear. They're some of the best instructions I've read for anything. If you're used to IKEA, this is crystal clear. Basically, it tells you each time, it tells you this week we're dealing with this part number, which is this particular collar or this particular gear or this particular spindle. There's one of them, and it came with magazine number 3 or magazine number 4. So you know exactly where you need to go. I need the spindle from this one, and I need the cog from last week's magazine or whatever. It tells you exactly what you need to know. And it gives you instructions written in English saying take the 91 tooth gear, which is number 15, which came last week, and put these 3 screws through it and then attach the collar on the other side. It gives you it in plain English, and it gives you an exploded view to make sure that you understand the relative positions of this, which fits into that, which then slides into that, which then screws into that, which then goes on top of the washer or whatever. You get the exploded view so you can see what's going on, and you get the finished view of the assembly so that once you've done it, if it doesn't look like that, you know you've done it wrong and you need to take it apart again. But basically, with a step-by-step guide, do 1, then do 2, then do 3. If you follow what's going on, you should end up with the assembly as indicated there. And it's all clear enough that I found that very easy to follow. If for any reason you don't have the magazines, don't worry, there's plenty of people who've made YouTube videos of this is how you build it. So you can literally just follow somebody else building it in front of you. I said one option is to subscribe to the original magazines, but the manufacturer doesn't necessarily still sell those subscriptions. So what's the alternative? The alternative is to find the 52 parts second-hand. They're out there somewhere. For instance, some people may say, I've got all the bits, but I really can't be bothered to build it, so I just want to sell all the bits. This particular person was on Facebook Marketplace and simply had essentially every piece of the Tellurion, and they've taken a picture of it so that you can almost confirm by looking at that yes, apparently all the bits seem to be there. You can not only go to Facebook, you can go to eBay, and you find people selling usually the magazines and the pieces. Occasionally they just sell the pieces. That doesn't matter. The magazines are not really necessary because you can always go to YouTube. People don't always sell the entire set. Sometimes they sell a few pieces at a time, or 10 pieces, or 20, or 40, but not necessarily all 52 pieces in one go. In which case, it's a little bit of detective work, and that's actually, that's quite fun. Knowing that you need 52 pieces, which are numbered, let's say, 1 to 52, this particular seller might be selling you piece 27, 28, 32, 33, and 49. A different seller might be selling you this, and you have to figure out, can I afford to buy a dozen pieces from this guy and 2 dozen pieces here and 3 pieces there and build up to get the entire set that I need? This particular seller didn't know what they were doing because they said, here's some stuff, buyer collects, and it's up to you. He thinks it's part of a Tellurion. Actually, remember the first picture I showed? An orrery, a brass orrery, and a brass Tellurion. I am quite convinced this is a few pieces of a Tellurion and a few pieces of an orrery. If you actually bought this and tried to build it, you'd end up with a Frankenstein, which was half orrery and half Tellurion. I can tell because that piece is quite definitely the piece which holds the Earth in place, and I absolutely know that that doesn't belong with the Tellurion. That definitely belongs with the orrery, as does this and this. And it could be a 50-50 split. How this person ended up with a few bits of this and a few bits of that, I don't know. But in this case, it's a question of, there's the photograph, you work it out. If you want it, buy it. Otherwise, tough. If it's not what you wanted, not my problem. So friends and I decided that we would like to build a Tellurion, and we basically scoured Facebook and eBay and Amazon, and after a period of a few weeks, we found various collections of pieces. And if you want to get it cheap, you sometimes buy a job lot. And that means that you may end up buying a few pieces from person 1 and a few pieces from person 2, and there could be some duplicates. It's worth having some duplicates if you end up getting the pieces you want. And it took my friends and I a few weeks to gather together all of the bits. And after we got sort of 30 or 40 or 45 or 50 or 51, as we were heading towards getting all 52, we realized that we'd spent a bit of money getting these 52 or nearly 52 bits, but along the way we had accrued quite a few duplicates that we didn't really want, but it didn't matter because they were just bonus parts for us because we wanted the other parts of the kits. But once we approached 52 and we realized we had lots of duplicates, we thought to ourselves, oh, what the hell? Let's just build 2 of them. So we found that we did have enough duplicates almost to build 2. So we bought a few more and ended up with enough to build 52 parts to build one and 52 parts to build another. And we have some triplicates, but what the hell, there's just a few bits left over. So as a homage to the telescopes Gemini North and Gemini South, my friends and I decided that they live in Birmingham, so that's Tellurion South, I live close to Liverpool, and so that's Tellurion North. So you're looking at Tellurion North here on the table in front of you. Tellurion South, of course, looks identical and is sitting 100 miles away at the moment. Beware, it can become obsessive. Clearly, some people end up collecting these things. I'm not sure how many are there. There are at least 3 Tellurians in the background and probably half a dozen orreries. And you can see from the fact that some of them look very skinny, this particular collector basically cannibalizes one in order to make another. And this particular collector will sell parts. If you say, I need part number 37, it's possible that he'll sell you part 37. It might cost a few quid, but what the hell? And a number of people will build these things and sell you the entire built thing. If you don't want to build it yourself, but you like the idea of having it on your mantelpiece, then you can go out and simply buy a completed, ready-made model. It'll cost a bit to post and package it to you, but you can do this. So beware, it can be addictive, or in some cases it can become damn obsessive. So my friends and I thought, right, we'll do this. Now that we've got all 52 bits, let's just have an enjoyable weekend putting this together. So on Saturday morning, I think it was, we just laid out all the 52 pieces that came. I said we bought this second hand, but bear in mind that all the pieces are still sealed in their cellophane wrappings. In other words, these are effectively mint. Even though they are second hand, they've never been broken out of their packaging, so they are perfect, unscratched mint, even though they are second hand. So we decided to follow the instructions and put it all together. And not surprisingly, you start with the Earth, you put the Earth on its tilted axis, and you put it on the end of this arm. The sun eventually will go in the middle. And then a few pieces later, you build the ring that supports the moon to take the moon around the Earth. And then after a little while, you couple it up to the sun in the middle there. The main drive, the motor is a single drive, comes through that central shaft, which then feeds all the various gears, which make sure all the relevant motion is at the right sort of speed. If you're going to try this yourself, I suggest you put the Tellurion in one of these rather shallow trays, the sort you can get from a garden centre. That simply means that if you are in the middle of constructing something, by using one of these Allen keys to try and get one of the grub screws just in place, and it falls off, it'll just fall into the tray. Otherwise, if it falls onto the table and then onto the carpet, you may find it rather difficult to find that grub screw. That's never happened to us when we were building it. Oh, I don't know what that's doing there. No, it never happened. So we timed it just out of interest, and it took us a weekend to put it together. When we worked out how many cups of tea it was, and taking into account meals, etc., we think it took about 10 hours to follow the instructions, to take the 52 parts and put them all together to make the Tellurion. Having made the Tellurion, we then found that, okay, some of the gears seem to be jamming with each other. Okay, we'll have to loosen that off a bit and just make a little adjustment. We hadn't put that at quite the right height. Let's just loosen that off and make sure it's tight, and then double check everything is nice and secure. It took a little bit of fine-tuning, a little bit of fettling, just to get it to run smoothly. But at the end, we had a working Tellurion after approximately 10 or 12 hours of effort. And it comes with 2 suns. The sun I've got there, plus a sun which has a light inside it, so you can actually illuminate the sun if you so wish. There's not an awful lot of point other than it looks pretty, because of course the relative size of the moon to the Earth to the sun is all incorrect. None of this is to scale. If that was the true size of the Earth, of course the sun would be huge and quite a few hundred meters away. But it just looks pretty to have an illuminated sun. But at the bottom line, what we have is a working Tellurion. And it is enormously satisfying to take 52 packets, open them up, bolt them together, and end up with something that does that. It's absolutely hypnotic to sit and watch it for a while. So in this particular case, we've got various gears, including the anomalistic indicator down here, telling you if it's annular or total eclipse. The moon is riding on this, you probably can't see it too well, this angled 5-degree tilted ring, which basically makes sure that you've got the node sorted out. That might be clearer if you come and have a look at it close up. But again, it's hypnotic to watch. Maybe you don't want to do it for hours at a time. The reflection of the moon in one of the gears there. There's the end of the Earth revolving. And there's no particular reason why they use chains rather than gears. It just makes a rather nice looking mechanism to use chains to take the drive from one point to a different gear, which then goes through another gear to move the moon, etc. So this was only supposed to be a short talk, so that's really all I've got to say. If you want to give it a crack, find the 52 bits but on eBay or elsewhere. You don't need the magazines. You can build it and you end up with an enormously satisfying construction. If you're the sort of person that likes model building or Meccano or anything else, this is absolutely fantastic. You can't necessarily get it from the original distributors called Eagle Moss, but there are other places you can get back issues and parts for the Orrery and the Tellurion. This applies to both, not just the Tellurion. There is other places that are called Partworks Collectibles, and they sell, again, the parts. And regardless of these other addresses here, I'll make these available to you. I'll send this particular handout to Chris, so you don't need to make a note of any of this. But the bottom line is the cheapest way of getting all the bits is to go on Amazon or eBay or Facebook and just find who's got what, and either buy them all from one person or buy a few from different people and collect them all together. So I hope that gives you a good idea of how you can go about building a Tellurion. Thank you.